COVID fatigue collides with new COVID realities as the daily case totals spike. With the governor's powers deflated by the state Supreme Court, is Michigan ready for the surge? And Election Day is a little more than a week away, but so many votes have already been cast. How do we know they're pristine? Today is Sunday, October 25th, 2020, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. Great to have you with us as we now hit the very last furlong of the long race to the White House. This past week saw the second and final debate between the president and the former vice president, and happily it was a far more dignified affair. It actually resembled a debate. But the truth is, it happened after many Americans had already put their vote to bed. This past week, Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson told us she expects 2 out of every 3 Michiganders will have already cast their vote before next Tuesday. So yes, many, many people have taken the absentee ballot option or early voting option, and yet even many of them have wondered about the sanctity and the security of voting in that fashion. And of course, there's still many on social media insisting there is all kinds of nefarious activity hovering around and over those ballots. Wednesday night, in a news conference that was somehow both unusual and unsurprising at the same time, we were again warned of foreign influence in our election, including the harvesting of voter data and records. This morning, the truth about how your vote is handled and why the difference between human error and fraud is so important. But up first, the resurgence of the coronavirus. Michigan is among the many states watching the numbers move in the wrong direction. And over the last month, hospitalizations in Michigan have tripled. But we also see the virus is less deadly. Does it change the way we should respond, especially in light of the court decision that stripped Governor Whitmer of the emergency powers that she believes helped us manage this virus for months? We'll start there today on Flashpoint. Well, for a while there, we got used to seeing Michigan's daily case count of the coronavirus way under our record highs, but now the surge is on, as many predicted it would be, back to nearly 2,000 cases a day in the state. Hospitalizations are up, and that matches what is happening in many other states. In fact, 8 other states with all-time highs on the number of hospitalizations. Let's get to the lay of the land right now today with my first guest, starting at the bottom of the screen here, and we'll move counterclockwise. Dr. Juan Marquez is the Washtenaw County Medical Director. Dr. Preeti Malani is the Chief Health Officer for the University of Michigan, and Dr. Roy Wilson, President of Wayne State University and by trade an expert on public health, back with us again. And Dr. Marquez, let me start with you. I'm sorry, Dr. Malani, let me start with you if we could about the situation at U of M. We basically got a lockdown going of students, and I'm really curious what you're seeing because we've been watching this happen all over the country. Our best and brightest young minds are the ones that are having a lot of problems dealing with this. What are you seeing happening on campus?
Thanks, Devin. So when we made the decision to return to face-to-face learning in Ann Arbor, the understanding was that carries some risk, and we took what we called a public health informed approach to the fall semester, which doesn't mean 0 cases of COVID. It means the ability to identify cases and contain and really prevent large outbreaks and certainly prevent spread into the community. And we'd had a number of cases throughout the semester, and I just wanted to acknowledge my good friend, Dr. Marquez, who has been a wonderful partner for us with the Washtenaw County Health Department. And what we saw in the last 2 weeks was really concerning to us in that the numbers were increasing, and that cluster in one of the halls in particular really was looking to be quite a large outbreak. And not just were there a lot of cases, but the individual people had a lot of close contacts, resulting in a large number of people needing to be quarantined. So that was the stay-at-home order went into place for that reason, since this was also in the background of cases increasing in the state, as you note.
And Dr. Marquez, when you look at what's happening countywide, then, is it a matter of the University of Michigan kind of being the hub of activity, or have you got problems elsewhere across the county now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say that certainly we've had a rise in cases in U of M students. But we also had a rise in other places in the community. And so I think that one of the, with our close collaboration with the University of Michigan was really understanding what our public health capacity would be. And so I think earlier we had a small spike in cases, and we were able to transfer some of our staff to really work with U of M students. But I think in the context of rising cases in the other parts of the county, we met with U of M and I think collaboratively decided that this was just putting too much of a stress on our public capacity. And so we proceeded with the stay-in-place order.
And Dr. Wilson, what's your view? Give us an idea of what's been happening at Wayne State, but also in general, how you feel like the state has been handling what's going on at its many universities.
Well, at Wayne State specifically, we've been very fortunate. We really haven't had a bad situation since about April, May timeframe. Obviously a lot of that is based on what's happening in the community, and the Detroit area has also not been as bad as some of the rest of the state. But one thing we're doing differently is we've determined ahead of time what we will tolerate and what we won't tolerate in terms of positivity, how many cases, how many clusters, what the hospital capacity is. And with any of these metrics are reached, we will shut down. And we decided to do that beforehand rather than wait until it happened and then talk about it.
It's interesting, Dr. Wilson, because we now see Detroit has a lower positivity rate when it comes to testing, positive results coming in off of those tests than much of the rest of the state. So I guess in that way, tip of the hat to Detroiters for the way that they've been dealing with this thus far, right? Yeah,
Detroit got hit really hard in March, April, and I think as a result of that, people have been super vigilant. There were other areas. I remember making a remark in that time frame about how well the Upper Peninsula was doing, and they were at that time. And obviously things have changed now, and so the lesson from that is none of us can become too complacent. We have to continue to act as if it can happen to us. We're fortunate that things aren't bad at Wayne State and in Detroit, but we can't get smug about that, and we have to continue to treat this virus with the respect that it deserves and be as vigilant as possible day in and day out.
Well, I'm curious to let you all weigh in on what you know now about the virus that you didn't know maybe 4 or 5 months ago, if we are heading into this, what it appears to be a new surge. Dr. Milani, I remember learning very early on that the sort of the natural course of a virus is that it becomes more transmittable, more communicable, but less deadly. Is that what's happened now?
Well, it's interesting, Devin. The epidemiology has shifted, and I think as more vulnerable older adults especially have sort of taken themselves out of circulation, we are seeing lower deaths, but death is just one measure, and there are a lot of poor outcomes related to COVID. I'd say the big things that I have learned or that we have learned is the transmissibility, as you know, the asymptomatic infection that is a big reason for transmission, and also the incredible effectiveness of masks. And that is something that I think really we didn't understand at the beginning of this, but it is something that's going to be with us moving forward.
In fact, some of the conflicting advice, people are still kind of beat over the head with what their take was on masks, maybe even 6 months ago. Dr. Marquez, it was interesting this week to have Dr. Janae Caldoun sort of really ratchet up her advice on if you want to eat in a restaurant, only take the mask off for the moment that you take a bite and then put it back on. What do you think? What are you learning so far about this that we didn't know before?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo the effectiveness of masks. I think that it's something we learn every day, and I think that just learning about the effectiveness of masks, and I think that from a public health standpoint, also learning about sort of the transmission dynamics of the virus, really, so what environments really lend itself to increased transmissibility. So small spaces, crowded places, poor ventilation, I think has really helped us understand where to start targeting our case investigations.
And Dr. Wilson, we've had you on the program a number of times since this whole thing started. I guess the last time was in, I believe, early August. So give me a read on what you've learned now that you didn't feel like you knew or understood before.
Yeah, well, certainly I have to agree with both Dr. Milani and Dr. Marquez, so I won't repeat what they said. But the thing that I think is often overlooked is that we focus on mortality. Sometimes we overlook the long-term morbidity of COVID-19. And to be honest with you, for me personally, I fear that more than I do mortality. I think the chances, the death rate is fairly low. I'm a fairly healthy person, but the possibility of having a cardiomyopathy or sense of smell being lost will adversely impact my quality of life in such a way that I'm scared stiff of those kinds of things. And that's something that I don't think we knew very much 6-7 months ago.
Well, Dr. Malani, speak to that if you would as well, because we now have a president who has gone through having it and has in many ways come out and said and bolstered the arguments that many have made, which is that, look, yes, you don't want to get this thing, but you're probably going to survive it. Overwhelmingly, the odds are in your favor that you're going to be fine, and that the shutdowns and the massive economic impact have not been worth sad to say, the lives that we've lost, but they're relatively few given the number of cases. How do you tend to approach that question, Dr. Malani?
Yeah, so thanks, Devin, for the question. And I echo what Dr. Wilson has said, in that this, we think of this as a respiratory virus and something causing severe pneumonia, but there's a whole large clinical spectrum. And we're finding that people, even with mild disease who are not hospitalized, can have lingering effects, neurologic effects. Plus, there's the emotional aspect of this that I think also gets underplayed. There's stigma, there's isolation. And in terms of whether it's worth shutting down the economy, I think that we can really find a good middle ground. No one wants to go back to the spring where we were all at home and not able to do anything. But if we all work together, we can continue, because there really is no economy if the public health piece isn't there. You need both of them to go hand in hand.
Dr. Marquez, same idea. It's funny because I think a lot of us have adjusted the way that we've behaved. We started out maybe wiping down every grocery, every piece of mail that came into the house. Maybe people aren't doing that as much. We have adapted some ways, but are you worried that maybe we're getting too lax?
That's a good question. I would say that there's a whole spectrum, right, in terms of our concern. On one hand, I think what we saw early on, wiping everything down, not wanting to touch any groceries coming in or the mail. I think we know a lot more about the virus, but my concern now is exactly the increased complacency. So that it's not solely practices that we've learned aren't necessarily effective, but that folks aren't engaging in practices that we know to be effective, specifically wearing masks and avoiding large crowded areas. I think that there is a degree of complacency that we are seeing, and I think it's a bit of pandemic fatigue and burnout from folks. And so I am concerned that the public is potentially getting a bit too complacent in regards to what we consider to be very effective known public health practices.
The fatigue of this and dealing with it on a daily basis is no doubt a big part of the way that we're responding now. But Dr. Wilson, I want to ask about the public policy portion of this. Now that we are going into, if we presume this to be another round or an uptick in cases, we now have a governor whose orders have have taken some of the teeth out of them by the state Supreme Court. Is that a problem moving forward? Or can we find other ways to fashion public policy that'll keep us safe?
Well, you might know that just within the past couple of days, there was a letter that was written by the Michigan Economic Recovery Council, which is made up of a group of business leaders as well as healthcare leaders and education leaders. And, we advocated for a more unified message with both the governor and the legislators, rather than the mixed messages that we're getting. I think the Supreme Court decision, one can argue about the constitutionality of it. It's basically a moot point. They've made their decision. But, one can certainly argue that it's caused some confusion, and people aren't sure exactly, what's right and what's wrong now and what's doable. I think that the public health department coming out with some orders has helped to clarify things a little bit. But we really need the legislators and the governor to get on board and work together. That's a great status update from all of you. I so appreciate it, Dr. Wilson, Dr. Malani, Dr. Marquez. Thanks so much for the time. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Devin.
You bet. We come back. Bye-bye. Sanctity and safety of your vote. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
Auto and truck accidents are serious, and those responsible should pay.
When I take your case, you won't pay me a dime until I win.
And that's why Feiger Law is unstoppable.
Don't miss the final days of the Gardner White grand opening in Rochester Hills. All stores are celebrating with savings up to $1,000 on the largest selection of top name brand mattresses in Detroit. Plus 0% financing up to 72 months and free same-day delivery. Your choice at just $7.95 with a free power base. Serta Perfect Sleeper, Beauty Rest, Sealy, and for the first time ever, get the limited edition iComfort at $7.99. Only at Gardner White, Detroit's #1 mattress store. Final weekend, Sunday 11 to 8.
Trust me, I'm a lawyer. Yeah, I know it's a line that gets a laugh until you've been in a serious auto accident. Deep down, when everything depends on the experience and talent of your lawyer, who do you want in the fight of your life?
Some say the treasure that they're digging is better than gold.
That gives us a real insight into our history.
Monday morning at 6:30, find out where this archaeological dig is and why it's making history. Watch Local 4 News today.
Weather, we've got you covered. Brandon on air, Paul online. The only morning show in Detroit with 2 meteorologists. Tracking big weather down to your neighborhood. On Local 4 News today.
I have received so many emails and social media messages over recent weeks from people worried about things that are clearly informed and frustratingly so by a lot of conspiracy theory making the rounds on social media about voting. I wanted to try to clear some of that up with a guy that I turn to time and time again for expertise on voting in America, and that's Vince Keenan, the founder of Publius.org, now working for the city of Detroit. But for today's purposes, back to his basics as a guy who understands what happens at the ballot box. Vince, I really appreciate the time, but let's start with how many claims that and how often you hear somebody talking about voter fraud, and how many times in the years that you've been doing this and watching this that you've actually seen voter fraud happen.
So I've never seen voter fraud actually happen, and I've been doing this for about 25 years or so, a little longer than that. Statistically speaking, they've done studies on this. MIT did a study that put it at 0.00006% chance of voter fraud being committed. And if you really think about it logistically, it's really hard for individuals to commit voter fraud. You could mess up your vote. You could maybe try and get another vote in, but one vote, one way or the other, doesn't throw off a presidential election, and it comes with incredibly steep penalties, right? You don't want to get involved in any of it. The return on investment of this particular type of crime isn't worth it.
Well, people have sent me emails saying 3 different ballot applications came to my house for the same person, or a bunch of different ballot applications came to my house for people that don't live here anymore. And I think the separation between a ballot application and a ballot is still confusing to a number of people, and that all of those applications seem ripe for fraud.
Sure, and this particular season with the transition, particularly in states like Michigan, where because of the pandemic, people are voting by mail more than they ever had before. You're seeing a lot more of these sort of solicitations to vote by mail too. That can very much look like an effort to try and get you to apply for a ballot, which they are, but they're not official. The reality is that you need to go and you need to register for your online ballot, or to online or call the clerk's office in order to apply for an AV ballot. There are solicitations that are there to remind you, but the fact that you get an invitation to vote AV or an application doesn't mean that you have a ballot in your hand. And that's the important thing, right? The ballots themselves are very carefully controlled. And when they go out, they come back in and they are validated against your signature on the qualified voter file in the state of Michigan. So it's really not possible for two votes to come in under the same person.
I was going to say, if you could explain the importance of the qualified voter file. That's really sort of the stone against which all of this is tested. And that's really where, because we've also, though, seen problems, for instance, in the city of Detroit, where the voter files are still filled with people who either moved away a long time ago, died 20 years ago, whatever the case may be. Talk about that, QVF.
Well, so Michigan really led the way on the establishment of the qualified voter file, which was a central repository of voters for the state. And you know, in effect, what happens in the media is that you know, just as the question that you posed, you know, what happens when there's a lot of people on the qualified voter file that are you know, have passed away or what. There is an effort to try and keep it as clean as possible, but wholesale purges of the voter record oftentimes catch people that just haven't voted in a while or haven't felt the urge or show up and they are registered and they are legitimate. And the disposition in elections is to allow people that have the right to vote to vote. And so, you know, we have to be careful about how we term, you know, low voter turnout or these sort of things, because the truth is that we want to make sure during any given election that as many people vote as are absolutely qualified and have the right to do so. But in Michigan, the qualified voter file was a groundbreaking piece of technology. It's probably about 20 years old now, but it really consolidated voter records, allowed for real-time checking of voter registration. I mean, these files used to be kept on paper, and they were meticulously kept on paper, but you can see how the transition to a system where you can pull up a laptop that's connected to the internet, and actually a secured version of the internet that is not open to prying Russian hackers, and allow people to real-time check voter registration and ballot. You can see where it has the improvements. That when I built the original Michigan the technology that was part of the Michigan.gov/vote website that let people check their voter registration online, it was only possible because we had at that time in 2004 a qualified voter file. The first version of it was even earlier than that.
Yeah, and a lot of people still aren't aware that you can go find exactly what your ballot will look like online because of that technology. The last thing, though, that I wanted to get to, Vince, if you're not worried about voter fraud, I do know that you are worried about voter disenfranchisement, and that is not the same thing. We just saw 9,000 votes in the primary that didn't count because they arrived in the mail too late. We constantly see breakdowns of machines and clerical problems in the city of, especially in the city of Detroit. But those two things, that does not necessarily amount to fraud.
No, and I think it's really important for people to understand. Elections are a human institution. They are not perfect, but they are built in such a way that there are different layers of checking that can be done and different ways that we can make sure that if a mistake is made, we can track backwards and figure out how to do it. And the redundancy is profound on this. Of course, the first line of defense against having to deal with any of those redundancies is a well-informed and prepared voter. And that's why a lot of people are talking about plan your vote. It's about the logistics, which is important, but not necessarily the only thing. You know, I often say, you know, it's like saying that where your polling location is and you know, all those particular logistics are as important to a voter as knowing where the hospital is when you're about to deliver a baby. It's really important. It's not the biggest thing on your mind, right? Exactly. Because a voter has to make an informed decision. And so I always encourage people, research your candidates, make sure you know what's going on. There's all kinds of information available about the presidential elections, but that's not the only it's never the only. No.
Proposals on and on and on, and exactly that's part of the marching orders of this program. And in fact, we hope we're educating voters. Well, I appreciate that, and you've just done a terrific service toward that end as well. Vince, it's always good to talk to you. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
You bet. Back with more on Flashpoint right after this.
Have you been injured in a car accident? Make the right call. We'll come to you if you can't come to us.
We handle claims for accident victims all throughout Michigan.
From our home to yours. If you've been hurt, do something now.
Are you saving all you can with your Medicare plan? With Priority Health, the Medicare Advantage plan that more individuals choose in Michigan, you'll have a $0 premium, a $0 medical deductible, and no cost for virtual care visits. Of course, you'll be covered for hospital and doctor visits and prescription drugs. Plus, you'll get so much more. Important benefits such as dental exams and cleanings, annual eye exam and eyewear allowances, annual hearing exam and affordable hearing aids, and over-the-counter allowance for things like Band-Aids, pain relievers, and more. If you are Medicare eligible, call now, and you'll receive a $10 gift card for calling to get a free analysis of how much you could be saving with no obligation to enroll. It's easy to see why an all-in-one Medicare Advantage plan can save you money and provide extra benefits and access to quality care. Don't wait. Call now and see how you could start saving money with a Medicare Advantage plan from Priority Health.
Choosing the right lawyer is hard. There's a lot of promises and uncertainties out there, but knowing you made the right decision is different. Making a promise and delivering on it, two different things.
Michigan is motivated to vote, and what's at stake matters.
So Local 4, Click on Detroit, and NBC News are committed to complete election coverage.
Debates, local and presidential.
Our Trust Index, we check the facts.
Devin and Flashpoint go beyond the headlines for real talk about the issues.
Hank is helping navigate the voting process.
Our polls reveal the pulse of Michigan.
The best vote is an informed vote.
Local 4 and Click on Detroit. Your vote has never been so important. Before we go, a quick note about next week's broadcast of Flashpoint. I'll be joined by Congresswoman Haley Stevens and the challenger in that 11th district race, the Republican Eric Asaki. They'll join us for the full program to debate who should be heading to Congress. So join us for that. Have a great week. Meet the Press coming up next, and we'll see you next time on Flashpoint.